Hello, everybody. Charles from GMAT Club and GMAT Ninja here. Here to help Hannah Mensner tell her MBA story. Absolutely fascinating applicant. Almost ended up on the reality TV show The Bachelor. Wrote a book while applying to MBA programs. Applied to 12 programs. We don't recommend that to everybody. Got into 9, if I'm counting correctly. Scholarships to a bunch. Absolutely fascinating applicant. Hannah, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're watching us live, please ask anything in the comments. Do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Hannah, I just want to start with just walk us through pre-MBA. So what were you doing for work? What were you thinking? What were you hoping to get out of the MBA? So let's just start with that stuff, and then we'll get into the fun with the application journey.
Yeah, so before applying to MBA programs, I had been working at Accenture for 4 years, just immediately out of undergrad at UVA. Started in their management consulting program, quickly became specialized in nonprofit and public sector clients based in the DC office. So I worked over those 4 years with a variety of clients in many different roles and was a consultant up for manager promotion by the time I was leaving to get my MBA. And I just knew that consulting was not for me for forever. It seemed like I was getting a little bit more and more siloed and specialized. And if there was a time to pivot into something else, that was the time to do it. And I still needed to discover what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. But I was really intrigued by big tech. I was really intrigued by retail, media and entertainment. And I was also intrigued by startups. So I wanted to pursue an MBA to pivot into any of these industries. And that was my goal, to get the MBA to kind of completely shift my career away from public sector consulting.
Awesome. So let's jump into the kind of how you thought about the application process itself. Part of what blew my mind reading your story is 12 applications. So I guess what were you looking for in schools? How were you trying to present yourself? What made you choose that many schools? What was your thought process at that point?
It was really hard to narrow it down. And I thought, why not cast a wide net? I admittedly lacked confidence in how it was going to go. I thought, I'd be lucky to be accepted into one of these schools, even though I had a good GMAT score, even though I had kind of an interesting background. I was really pessimistic about the results. So I said, let me just cast a wide net and see what happens. And I'm not going to cut any school out because I don't think it's a good fit. I actually had a list of 10, and then an advisor said, well, why not this school and this school? It's just one more essay, one more application. And I was like, I don't know if I would fit in there. Like, I don't know if that's the right culture for me. And he said, well, let's just try it. So he convinced me. I will admit it wasn't that bad because I did apply to 6 of those schools via the consortium application. Which really streamlined the process. And I definitely aligned with the consortium's values. And so I was excited to see how that process would turn out for me. But it was a lot of work. I applied to all 12 in round 2, and I did procrastinate a little bit on the essays. So I think that week before they were all due, I was just in front of a chair writing nonstop, and that was pretty painful, but it was definitely worth it. And I went through with all 12, and I interviewed for 11 of those schools, which made for a crazy few months managing that schedule.
Amazing. I want to talk more about the writing process and what all that was like for you. Before we get there, can you say a little bit about the consortium for people who aren't familiar? So that streamlined your process, 6 schools through the consortium. For those who don't know, what is the consortium? How does it work?
Yeah, so the consortium is a common application, but it's also an organization for individuals who want to promote diversity in future organizations. So what happens is once you apply, you may be given a consortium fellowship, which will pay your tuition at a university, but you are essentially agreeing to move forward their values and focus on diversity in your future career. And so that's something that's really interested me. I have taken a lot of the DEI courses at Wharton. I wrote a book about women in business. So I really want to be a proponent of diverse voices in our organizations. So I really aligned with that message and thought I would love to be a consortium fellow. And so I applied to 6 schools via that fellowship and was granted the fellowship for one of those schools, which was Berkeley Haas. And And so that made it a really tough decision about where to then go, because I had more acceptances than I had anticipated. And some of those came with scholarships or fellowships. So that was a difficult decision to make.
So talking about Consortium, the book you wrote, let's talk about that book. So tell us about what it was about, what inspired you to write it, and when did you write it exactly in terms of your application timeline?
Yeah, so the book is called Glass Sealing Epiphanies, and it's about stories from real women in business about the lessons that they learned through their careers and how to apply them in yours. So I know that in my career, I've had these epiphanies, these moments where I've said, oh, I should have negotiated that offer. I should have done this differently. I'm sure other women have experienced this. What if we could share these stories so we don't all have to just repeat each other's mistakes? And I was inspired because I read Lean In when I was 16 years old, and I'd seen women in my career at Accenture make it to leadership and then others not. And I was just curious about why there was still this gender gap in the corporate world when we'd closed that gap in a lot of other places in society. So I wanted to kind of shine light on that issue and share stories of other women. So I interviewed a lot of women, colleagues, mentors, and shared their stories in the book. And I was doing all of this while I was applying to business school, which I really don't recommend. I started writing the book in October of 2021, and I submitted the applications that round 2, so that January, 3 months later, while I'm trying to get my first manuscript complete. I finished writing in March. That's also around the time that I was interviewing, and then published the book in September of 2022, a few weeks after I had started at Wharton. So it really was kind of at the same time. But it was fun because I got to talk about writing the book in my MBA interviews. So that was interesting. I think a lot of the interviewers were really intrigued by what I was doing, and were really excited about the prospect of what it was going to become. So it's been a great experience. I'm really glad I wrote it. I will definitely write a second, maybe a third book. And I've learned so many more epiphanies since I've come to Wharton.
I love it. Okay, so you were accustomed to being tethered to a chair, typing into infinity. Took a break sort of from writing the book so that you could sit there and write a ton of applications. So comfortable writing, which I think helps a lot for anybody watching going, oh, I'm going to apply to 12 schools. Helps if you love, I assume you love writing, Hannah. Is that a
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
It helps enormously if you actually love writing. Some writers both love and hate writing, which is why I asked the question. Hannah, I'd love to hear if you're comfortable answering this, the short version. So it sounds like you started writing that book with sort of the fundamental question of why is it that the gender gap is closed in some areas of life and not in others. In corporate life, it is not being closed as quickly as any reasonable person would like. Is there a quick I realize there's no clean answer to something like this, but I guess
No.
is there a quick version of kind of what you discovered as far as like what are some of the key dimensions you think that have held us back from progress in that area?
Yeah, it's definitely a nuanced answer, and there's no single thing that we can point to. I think a lot of books for women in business are saying, take charge of your career. And that's great. That's a lot of the message in my book. But also it's just a broader societal issue that we as individuals can't really change. And this is something I've learned a lot in some of my DEI courses at Wharton, is there's policies that we think are going to have a positive effect, but actually kind of leave us worse off. And I think a lot of those are around family life. And when you go on maternity leave to focus on family, that does set you back, even though we like to think that it wouldn't. You lose out on that valuable time that some of your male colleagues aren't losing. And so I think it really comes down to, can we put in place more gender equitable policies that don't punish women for making certain choices and set them back unintentionally, because that's just what we're seeing continue to happen. So it's not just on us as individuals to be advocates for ourselves and for other women around us, but it really is, how do we put in better policies in our organizations and in our societies?
I love it. That was a great, I realize that's a really complicated answer, which is why it is likely to be a series of books. And you could probably write half a dozen and say, yeah, there's more to this. But so thank you for indulging me on that. Okay, back to your application journey. 12 schools. Give us a quick rundown. I guess, let me ask you this. Which schools, you talked a little bit earlier about culture and some of the schools that your MBA advisor recommended you apply to. as you started to sneak into the double digits in terms of the number of applications. And you kind of said, well, I don't know if that's a cultural fit. Early on in your process, were there certain schools that you looked at and said, ooh, this one, I think this one was going to be a really good fit? What were the schools you were most fixated on early? And how did that list evolve as time went on?
Yes, I really liked, there were a few that I really liked, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do. Stanford, for example, I liked for the location. I liked how it was very entrepreneurial focused, given my interest in pivoting into startups. So for me, that was kind of choice number one. I was also really intrigued by Wharton. I'd been rejected from Wharton in undergrad, and I said, this has always been a dream school. So of course I have to try again. We'll see what happens. But I think that the two that I was less sure about, they were Haas and MIT. And I just thought they were smaller programs. To me, they seemed a little bit more male oriented, and I really wanted to be surrounded by other women. And also MIT seemed very quanty, and I know this about myself. I'm not as quantitatively strong, but I did it anyway. And those ended up being the two schools that gave me the most scholarship money. So it was, you never know what's going to happen. So I would say don't make those assumptions up front and just see what happens.
Really interesting. Okay. So initially it sounds like the list was, so Stanford and Wharton were kind of your top two. Harvard in there somewhere.
Harvard was up there too. Yeah.
Cool.
For sure.
And then applied to Haas. So Haas, MIT, Columbia, I think I've heard. And to put you on the spot, what was the rest of the list in the end? The other half dozen?
Yeah. Columbia, Ross, Foster, Kellogg, Booth. I feel like I'm forgetting one. Stern, Sloan, all of those.
Love it. Okay. So then you get admitted to more places than you expected.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Congratulations. Got scholarships. So I guess which ones gave you enough scholarship money to make you really think hard about them?
Definitely Haas, definitely MIT, and a little bit Kellogg for sure. Oh, I forgot Yale. Yale also gave me some scholarships. So I think the decision came down to those three, Haas, MIT, and Kellogg, because of the scholarship money, and then Wharton. And that made it a really tough decision.
Awesome. So tell us more about that decision. What were you thinking about as you made that decision? Again, it sounds like culture is important to you. That's been a big part of what you kind of everything you talk about. There's so much of, I want to be in an environment and in a culture that really works. So tell us a little bit about how, as an applicant, it's you can't go and sample the school. Really, you can visit. But I guess what were you trying to get out of it? How are you approaching that process of trying to understand culture from sort of being on the outside in order to make that decision?
Yeah, so I didn't visit any of the schools before I applied, and kind of kept my options open, didn't make any assumptions. Once I got in, I tried to go to as many of the visitation days that I could. I could only really make it to 2, but I went to Wharton's, and just the minute I stepped on campus, I don't know how to describe it. I felt this energy, and meeting all the other admitted students, it was just like we were all so excited to be there and to plug into this environment. And I could tell that this is going to be a very active place where there would always be something for me to do and learn from. So that really excited me. I was just so energized when I left after that weekend, and I didn't feel that at some of the other places that I visited. So it was really kind of that moment that I said, oh, I really want to go here. But is it the smart decision financially? It just was getting hard for me to justify it. And I had to think back to before I was applying, when I didn't know whether anybody was going to give me scholarship money. I had done kind of the calculations on the ROI and said, yes, I'm willing to pay full price for an MBA. And so I had already determined that I'm willing to pay full price. Now that choice is in front of me, is that still true? And I think it also came down to, what am I going to regret saying no to the most? Because it's hard to say no to all of them because they're all such amazing schools. But it was, what is going to be the least painful, no. So Wharton was the answer. And I felt really good about that answer. it was kind of like vindication after being rejected in undergrad. But I just knew that I was going to have an incredible 2 years here, and that Wharton was going to set me up for success in whatever I pivot into, because I was still a little bit undecided. So I just knew it was a safe choice career wise. I knew it would give me a great network and that I was going to enjoy the experience.
Awesome. And in the end, obviously a massive misstatement to call that scholarship money a rounding error. That's crazy thing to say when it's 6 figures worth of scholarship money. But when you think about just the size of the ROI on an MBA, it sounds like you kind of said this matters. The scholarship matters a lot, but it isn't so overwhelming in the scheme of things. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that calculation differs for everybody. I think the scholarship decision varies for everybody. And I'm sure there are some people who think I made the wrong decision. And sometimes I question that too. I'm like, dang, these loans are a little bit painful. Maybe I should have gone the other way. But then I think of all the incredible experiences I've had and every day that I have on campus here, and I really don't regret it. So yes, it's a difficult decision. I think it's up to everybody to kind of do that calculation for themselves, and don't discount any school for any preconceived notion you may have. I would say really give it a chance.
So let's get to the application process, since I imagine most people watching would love to be in the position of worrying about which school to go to, Wharton or any of 3 scholarships. But in the application process, I guess, was there anything that surprised you? Are there schools where you thought, wow, there's no way these guys are going to give me a scholarship. I don't think they're going to let me in. Some of the schools you've already mentioned as some of your final 4. Is there anything that you feel like you did differently or better in those applications versus some of the others?
I honestly don't think so. I feel like my applications were all very similar. I mean, the inputs were the same GMAT, same recommendation letters. The essays were very similar as well. Something I did early on was I compared all the essay prompts from these different schools, and I said, okay, these are actually all very similar. There's maybe 4 or 5 core essays here, and I can manipulate them for each school, for each of the specific prompts, but there's really only 4 or 5 stories I need to write. And that made it a lot easier. So I actually think my story was very consistent through every single school that I applied to. I really think it's just a matter of what they're looking for. And for every 10 applicant, there's 10 others that could have gotten in, right? It's a competitive process. So I didn't take it personally when it didn't go my way. I mean, I had a great interview at Booth. I thought I had a really solid application, and I got put on the wait list. And then I thought there's no way, I'm even going to get an interview at Stanford. And I got an interview there, but then I was on the wait list. So you just never really know what's going to happen. I got straight up rejected from HBS, no interview at all. But then I got interviews everywhere else. So it's just like, you never know what's going to happen. And I would say just roll with the punches. It is a process. Prep for each school individually. Know that it's unique. The interview process is going to be unique. And just really focus on one school at a time when you're considering it. And I think that's the best strategy that you can have.
I love it. So in the end, obviously had great outcomes, 12 schools, 9 admits, 2 wait lists, plenty of scholarships in there. So it went really well for you. But it sounds like you're saying that variation is kind of more random than anything. Obviously, some schools are hard to get into. There's never any shame in getting rejected from HBS. But Booth, for example, felt a little bit random, went well, but sometimes stuff happens, and it wasn't anything in particular.
Exactly. And then, I mean, I was surprised at the scholarship from Haas. I thought, this is such a random choice of all the 6 schools I applied to via the consortium, but I was honored. So yeah, and that interview went just as well as all the others. So there's really no way to predict what's going to happen.
I love it. Okay, so because we only have a few more minutes here, would love to hear more about just your experiences so far at Wharton. What are you loving? Is there anything you're not loving? And what's next for you? So you came in with one career vision. Is that still where you're headed, or have things evolved for you?
Yeah, I'm loving the entire experience. It's truly been an incredible year and a half. I've made some of the closest friends of my life. I'm enjoying my courses, have gone on some incredible trips. I studied abroad in India last winter for a global immersion program. I'm doing one of our leadership ventures, hiking in the Andes this spring. I'm taking a bunch of friends back to Idaho over winter break where I grew up and kind of taking them skiing, showing them around. So it's definitely been an incredible community to become a part of. Regarding career, I interned this summer at a startup. It's a space startup called Starfish Space in Seattle, Washington. Series A, I was on the operations team. It was an incredible experience, and it really ignited my interest in startups. It was already there, but it kind of reaffirmed that I really like the culture. I like the more how it's a smaller team. Kind of you have to be a jack of all trades, ready to jump in at any moment. So I am looking at startups for full-time opportunities and recruiting. And I'm trying to move to Los Angeles. So that's the plan. I met my partner at Wharton, so he and I are making that move together, and we'll see what happens.
I love it. Hannah, thank you so much for doing all of this. Any last words for people who are in the middle of the application process or who are just seeing it on the horizon in the next cycle and are starting to dread it? What's the one piece of advice you would give people to focus on?
Ask why not me. I think coming to Wharton, I've met a lot of people who say, how did I end up here, right? Like everybody here is so accomplished and intelligent, and I am just here and that's a fluke. But it's not, it's that imposter syndrome. You deserve a seat in one of these classrooms. You can get here, know that you're capable of it. So go for it anyway, right? Don't let anything hold you back. Just try.
I love it. Hannah, such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for doing this with us. For anybody watching live, I tossed a link to her book, Glass Sealing Epiphanies, is in the chat. Hopefully we can get that into the video description as well. And Hannah, thank you so much for doing this. Enjoy every minute of your last 6 months or so at Wharton.
Thank you so much, Charles. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time. And I don't have the magic button to turn it off, so we will stare awkwardly.
We will wait.
I guess we're supposed to continue. I don't know.
Oh, we can continue.
we can.
I got more in me.
Yeah, I feel like we can do this for a while. But then we'll get cut off mid-sentence.
I see we have some comments.
Yeah, just some good positive comments in here. People enjoying the conversation. Were you really Miss Idaho, or is that a random comment there?
I am Miss Idaho right now.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so I missed a week and a half of school in September to go compete at Miss USA. So that was awesome, and I did not get any excused absences for my classes. So I took the L on a few assignments, but
that's amazing. I love it. I wonder if our producers here left this going just so we could bring up the Miss Idaho part. Where in Idaho are you from, Hannah?
I'm from Boise.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So anybody watching, good things happen in the great American Mountain West. I'm in Colorado, so I'm in Denver.
Oh, love it.
So yeah, Idaho is amazing. So we can make this an ad for Idaho, Wharton, your book. What else can we promote here?
So many things.
Yeah, so I suppose we could just leave the studio and kind of wander off, or just wait until the producers turn it off. I guess let's keep going. So I'm kind of want to dive more into the book if we're kind of stuck on the broadcast anyway.
Yeah.
What are the directions you would take the next book? Because you mentioned it seems like there are more here. What are you thinking? What might the next one be about, or what might the focus of it be, or as you go through the next round of interviews?
Yeah, I've met a lot of really amazing women at Wharton, and I'd love to share their stories. So I think specific MBA stories, kind of targeting our demographic, our age group, less so what they've done in the past, but more what they're working on for the future. There are a lot of women working on founding startups while they're here at school, and I've loved asking them about that experience. I'm actually starting a podcast. It's the Glass Sealing Epiphanies pod, where I interview female founders and entrepreneurs. So I just posted the first episode to Spotify. It's just called the Glass Sealing Epiphanies pod. And I interviewed Vita Malala, she graduated from Wharton last year and is the co-founder of Flock AI, an AI startup focusing on creating diverse images of models for beauty and fashion. So it's really cool to hear about that experience for her and how she's kind of pivoted, how she took time off from Wharton to focus on it last year. And now she's graduated and working on it full time. So it's a really interesting story if anybody wants to give it a listen.
That's awesome. One more thing that when you talk about the so the issue of parenthood, right, and how that sort of leads to differential outcomes. I remember reading a study maybe 5-10 years ago now, where when you look at the gender wage gaps, it's not that bad until you hit the point where people have children, and women who do not have children, the trajectory continues not so different. There's still issues there, not so different from the trajectory of men in terms of their wages. But as soon as there's children, men's trajectories keep going up, women, it nosedives. And even when you look at newer data, you say, oh, well, that was a 1960s thing. And it's like, well, no, it's still happening every day.
Yeah.
So how much of that, so you mentioned policy, which is a key part of it. How much of that do you think is more cultural? What I experience my kids are 3 and 5. What I feel like I've experienced is the assumption that, oh, well, you're a dad, you've got to provide, so you're still going to work your butt off, maybe even more. And it's like, well, no, I take on a ton of I have to take kids home from school, and I have to rearrange my schedule just like everybody else. But the assumption is that the mom will take that on, and therefore the mom is going to be less active in her career. And that strikes me as cultural in addition to policy. Is that what you're running into as well? Or do you think I'm way off there, that there's the assumption that the mom is going to be a worse employee, professional, whatever, and the dad's going to be a better one once he becomes a dad?
Yeah, no, that's very true. There are kind of these cultural assumptions that we make, and it's really hard to change those when they've been ingrained into us for pretty much all of human history. And another thing is, a lot more women are saying, I don't want to have children. And that's fine. That's great. But what happens is, I learned this in my economics of diversity class. There's studies that show that even when a woman says that, when she reaches that age where women typically have children, employers still kind of anticipate that it's going to happen, and they react accordingly. And they may not be aware that this is happening, but we are less likely to promote women around that age. We're less likely to give them challenging projects and opportunities that are really going to propel them to success, to high visibility, because there's always kind of that anticipation in the back of our minds, like, well, they might have to disappear for 6 months.
Right.
And even if that isn't going to happen, we're still kind of subconsciously making those decisions, and that's an issue, and it's really hard to figure out how to tackle it when it's just kind of this subconscious cultural notion. So that's something that is going to take a long time to correct for. I think a lot of companies are aware that this tends to happen, and so some are actively trying to go against these tendencies, and they're trying to make it a more equitable playing field by offering parental leave on par with maternity leave for fathers. And that's great. I think more fathers and men need to take those opportunities and really use that time so that we can come to kind of an equal playing field, because taking 6 months away from your job limits 6 months of work experience, which is going to slow down promotion. It compounds over time. So yes, I think we definitely need to recognize that this is a cultural issue, do what we can policy-wise to try and counteract it, and just constantly be aware that this is going to happen. It's kind of hardwired into us based off of how society's been for ages.
I love it. I could talk about this all day. We finally have somebody to rescue us, and we were supposed to only go for 20 to 25 minutes. We're pushing 30. So got somebody to push the button and let us off the hook here. Hannah, this is so much fun. So I didn't even know the Miss Idaho part when we started until a commenter mentioned it. Miss Idaho almost was on The Bachelor during her application process.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Wrote a book. We'll write more books. I love the way you think about all this. And yeah, thank you again for doing all this.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. All right, bye.